Always had a lot of intuition. Honestly, I think some of my strength in my career came from the fact that I would have an intuitive knowing, but then I needed data and facts to back it up, would send me on a journey to learn how to do something or to go find the data that maybe other people weren't looking for, but my intuition was telling me was important.
Welcome, everyone, to the Lonely at the Top podcast, a podcast for high-level leaders carrying the invisible weight of the world, because you know the higher you rise, the fewer people you can safely talk to. Here we welcome founders, executives, and decision makers who feel the isolation and the pressure that comes with power. Lonely at the Top is your sanctuary in the storm, and I'm your host, soul medic and former psychotherapist, Rachel Alexandria. Today we have with us Sunni VonMutius. She's an intuitive strategist and a fractional COO. She applies her 20-plus years of business experience, along with lessons from her rich, adventurous life, as a catalyst for clarity, ease, and momentum in life and business. She began her career working in enterprise technology. For the past decade, she's been applying her unique style of metaphysical project management in all manner of less traditional environments. Sunni, I'm so excited to chat with you. I know you have such a rich history and varied experience, and I think we're going to be all really curious about metaphysical project management. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So we know each other because we are part of a very interesting club. I guess I shouldn't be surprised about metaphysical project management because we are part of a club known as Witches and Weirdos. Everyone listening to this podcast is hearing such interesting insights into the varieties of my life. Witches and Weirdos is a group of business owners who sit on the woo side, I think. We take a walk on the woo side of life. And we've known each other just a little bit from that over the last year, I think.
I think so. It's been about a year, yeah.
So have you always been a highly woo-ish person, a highly intuitive, metaphysical kind of person?
I don't know that I have consciously. There was definitely a chapter in my life and my career where that was not awareness. It wasn't something that I necessarily talked about or pulled from, but now using hindsight, absolutely. I always had a lot of intuition. Honestly, I think some of my strength in my career came from the fact that I would have an intuitive knowing, but then I needed data and facts to back it up, which would then send me on a journey to learn how to do something or to go find the data that maybe other people weren't looking for, but my intuition was telling me was important. And so in the moment, did I sound like I was spiritual and metaphysical and woo? No. But looking back, yes, it was definitely part of my secret sauce.
Well, so tell us a little bit, because we don't cover it in your bio, a little bit for the audience about your corporate background so that they understand where you were bringing that to.
Yeah, I absolutely fell into a corporate career. I changed my major a lot during the time I was getting my 2-year degree because I was always kind of curious about the world. And the very short version is I was recruited as a temporary employee by an insurance company that had 5 women with maternity leave all in 1 year. And so I got to be in every single department. They just hired me as a full-time employee because they knew they had so much leave. And at the end of that year, the IT department was like, we see you. You're curious and finding technology solutions for lots of problems that people aren't thinking about. You should come work for us. And flash forward, 15 years later, I was doing high-level strategy for very large companies at very high tiers of leadership, doing project management, coordination, strategy. I just kind of stumbled my way, faith it till you make it style, through a technology career. Yeah.
Wow. And a technology career is definitely not one where people associate intuition.
No, not at all. And we're talking, this started in the late 90s, right? So I was coming up in tech in a time where there was definitely a generation of female presenting people in the industry, but they were very small and had to work very hard. So I was really like just on the tails of those bootstraps. It was still very early in that time were even having feelings, right? I was taught as a woman not to say I feel this way in a meeting because it would be too, right? So yeah, definitely
Yeah.
not a lot of intuition in tech, especially in the 90s and early 2000s.
Wow. Yeah, I have a client who was a technology and a bit older than both of us, I believe. I think she's maybe 10 years older. And I've heard a lot from her about how hard it was to be a woman in tech, be an engineer, and get any kind of respect, basically.
It was a wild time. I can think of multiple examples where I could see men take credit for really clear ideas coming from women or lots of work that had been done by a woman. And then you get in the meeting and suddenly there's a man, sometimes not even in leadership, but a peer just being
Mm.
assumed to have and not correcting. And so looking back, I can see, I'm grateful though, because I can see how far we've come. It
Mm.
is quite different now, and there is still a long way to go. And I feel fortunate to have witnessed that sort of evolutionary trajectory to be able
Yeah.
to be grateful for the fact that we have indeed come a long way.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I didn't come up through corporate at all. So I've just been running my own business for so long that I look back and I'm like, yeah, I don't know a lot about what that aura of suppression or being held down to the glass ceiling. Like, that's just not been my experience, mostly because I haven't been in that environment. But I remember being a young woman in the 90s feeling like, oh, women are so much more equal and we're so much liberated and things are so good. And then I get into my 40s and I'm like, oh, wow, we've come so much farther than when we started. Now it's kind of like back in the old day. Women didn't even,
Absolutely.
it's crazy. That's amazing. Well, it's something we haven't talked about much on the podcast yet. I can't believe we haven't, because most of my guests have been female presenting. But we haven't talked a ton about the additional component of loneliness of being a female presenting person in leadership at the top. So leadership already isolating. And then you add this extra element of you can't be as much of the self that you're used to being in ways that would be totally normal anywhere else, because it's going to, quote, read the wrong way in a mostly male dominated field.
Yeah.
How was that for you?
Honestly, I fairly shamelessly weaponized my femininity in
Ooh,
order
tell
to
us about it.
excel.
I want to hear about
For
that.
for a good chunk of the middle of my career, I was a consultant with an IT service provider. And so my job was to go into potential client locations as a
Mhm.
free, air quotes, free resource, right? And
Mhm.
embed myself and get them to forget that I was not an employee so I could listen in and hear all of the ways that we could serve their company, their department, and then feed it to sales so they could come in with a pitch that was actually on point. So I was
Wow.
basically doing discovery and recon. Most of the time, that was really transparent. And there were times where we got a little creative. And so I would show up to a meeting. I remember one in particular, it was two IT departments were smaller brands and they had been bought by a larger brand. And the larger brand was who orchestrated this. So they sent me in to facilitate a merging of these two smaller IT departments. And I showed up early and made friends with the female secretary, asked if I could help get the coffee, anything I can do to set up the space, just kind of settle in. And all of these male presenting humans arrive and they sit down and they start chit chatting. They ask me for coffee and they assume I'm there to take notes and I don't say a word. And they chit chat and they talk, and I hear all the dynamics at play, all the power grabs, right? 45 minutes goes by. They get real frustrated. They call their boss. Where's the consultant? The consultant goes, Hey, Sunny, are you in the room? I'm like, yes, sir, I am right here.
That's amazing.
And I stand up, and the notes that I've been taking and the presentation I had ready to go that I just filled in a few details, I immediately present. And they go from seeing me as a cute young thing that they're giving eyes at to, I whip my intelligence out and slap it on the table. And that shock effect had them not have a whole lot of time to objectify me and have objections, because it all happened in a way that took them by surprise. And
That's
I earned
amazing.
trust real fast because I was able to slip in there real fast. And so, but I had no problem with the fact I looked like a walking Barbie at that point in my life. I had no problem working with their assumptions and using it to my advantage, because in that climate, it felt foolish not to. And it worked. I succeeded. I was able to broker a lot of really good mediations and deals. And the part that felt good for me is that I knew that the sales guys were coming in with an actual helpful pitch versus
Mm,
like skeezy upsales. Like I felt like I
right.
could be the person going, no, really, like I really think this is going to benefit you. And that felt good. That part felt really good.
That's amazing. That's I love that story. Like I feel like that's if you had it on video, that would be such a viral video of like, "Oh yeah, I'm totally here. Let's go."
Right here, boss. It makes it even better that it was in rural manufacturing, Midwest country, and the
Mhm.
office was straight out of the 70s. We're talking fake wood paneling, still smelled like the cigarette smoke from the 70s,
Ooh.
like
Whoa.
corduroy seats. And so, like,
Wow.
even just the antiquated surroundings. And then, me, this little Barbie looking bit of a thing, stands up and has this big presentation. It was just the juxtaposition tickled me.
Oh, that's amazing. You must have been so amused with yourself. You must have gone and told that story.
It was years before I realized the feat it was, because I didn't have any female mentors that I could call and tell it to.
Oh.
There wasn't really anyone I could celebrate with. The secretary on the
Mm.
way out like slipped me some dark chocolate and a wink, but that was about all there was. There wasn't a big celebration. In fact, I remember going for drinks a couple days later with the sales crew, who
Mhm.
took credit for what a good idea it was to send me in there, and that I had the right disposition, and that they had this great strategy. It wasn't look at what Sunny was able to do, it was look at us for having this idea,
Blech.
right? So yeah, it was years before I looked back and was like, man, that was kind of badass. Like, look at me
That
going
was
early
yes, that's
20s self.
amazing. That's awesome. I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it gives a lot of really cool insight into your character and the way that you're able to take so many pieces of what's expected and who you are and use it to your advantage. And yeah, I hear the loneliness, like that you
Mm-hmm.
were alone in your gender identity and in that career and in lacking the leadership that would really understand what that was like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was a
Did
very
that
lonely time.
is that part of what informs what you do now?
I'm sure. Not like in a conscious journey, like I felt this, now I want to solve this problem, but I'm sure. I mean, it can't not inform. I do a lot of community building. I do a lot of culture
Mm-hmm.
and human first approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely, having experienced what it's like to not have that, I have a unique perspective and passion, around it. I also was often the youngest person in the room by a couple of decades, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so being willing to sort of address and bust up some antiquated notions around business and how business has to be, and capitalism versus commerce. So those are all conversations that I can see had their roots and seeds planted in the early
Mm-hmm.
stages of my career.
Mm.
Yeah.
Can you say a bit more about that? I'm curious about those conversations. Those are conversations you have now, capitalism and
Mm-hmm.
commerce.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a bit more about that. That is part of what you do as an intuitive strategist and a fractional COO.
Yeah. So technically, I retired about 10 years ago. And so a big part of what's important to know about me, there's two things. One, I have that freedom and that privilege, right?
Mm-hmm.
I get to say yes to things when I'm a whole body yes. I don't have the pressure of paying the bills, which is very different for
Mm-hmm.
some people. So that's an
Mm-hmm.
important note.
Mm-hmm.
And the other piece is that I don't take that privilege lightly. And so a lot of what is underneath most of my work is a desire to redistribute the wealth that I know
Mm-hmm.
I earned in part because of hard work and in part because of privilege. So I want to be a part of redistributing that. So yeah, I get to play with people where it's a whole body yes, and the people I like to play with are the ones who absolutely it's a business and absolutely we need to make money, and the point of making money is so they can have a comfortable life. The point of the business is to make an impact, whether that's through
Mm-hmm.
creating a culture where their employees get to have a really great work-life balance, which is a myth in and of itself, or
Mm.
whether the product or services that they are offering are making the world a better place, right? Whether they're making a bunch of money so that they can then use it for philanthropic efforts. But I don't anymore play with organizations where the only goal of the organization is to make as much money as possible. That's
Mm-hmm.
capitalism. I'm more interested in commerce, where we are
Mm.
exchanging services, we're exchanging energy. And the goal is not necessarily that the owner of the company or that company wants to be on top, rather, that that company wants to succeed at fulfilling on their mission. And there is a
Mm.
distinct difference there. And most of the companies I worked for in my corporate career were not that, right? I made a
Mm-hmm.
lot of mostly men, very wealthy, right? I
Mm-hmm.
contributed to their success, to big deals being brokered for a few people to become very wealthy. And I don't want to play
Mm-hmm.
that game anymore, personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for you. It sounds like burning karma in a way. I mean, obviously, everybody needs to make a living, right? That's just how our society is structured.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I love that. Redistributing wealth, and you get to actually make the people successful whose missions align with yours.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah, I mean, money is a wonderful measurement of energy. I've got nothing against making some money. It's when that is
Yeah.
the only goal that I have personally chosen to opt out of that
I
model.
mean, agreed, because it becomes a sickness. Money just for money's sake becomes, it just begets illness, which is a concept I think I first learned about in Bowling for Columbine, Michael Moore's movie, all the way back in the day. I know, right? No one
Haven't
ever
thought
mentions
about
that
that in
movie anymore.
ages.
I know. I think it was that movie. I watched some impactful movies back in the early 2000s. But I remember just seeing this concept of money for money's sake is kind of a cancer. You know, if there's no other mission behind it, it
Mm-hmm.
just becomes an unfulfillable and insatiable need, a hungry ghost. So, yeah, I think that's really admirable that you've gotten yourself into a place where you can make sure that the people that you're helping be successful are the ones who are contributing to society and think about things. I love that definition too, because I'm like, if it's not capitalism, what do we call this system of exchange? Commerce instead of capitalism. I love that. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have all this wide experience. We talked a little bit about the loneliness you experienced being female presenting and being in the particular industry. um, what is a season or decision you had to make as a leader that really tested you? What's a story that you can tell us?
Man. There's a few things that come to mind. I'm sure there's way more interesting ones, but the one that's coming to mind first, so it's the one I'm going to go with. I was working, and this one I can even say the company name. I was working for what at the time was Jim Beam Brands. Now they've been bought and they're part of a larger conglomeration, but at the time they were still an independent brand. And my office was in a bottling plant in Cincinnati, and I was providing IT support and leadership for the whole Northeast region, which sounds very impressive, but it was just a handful of bottling plants. And I really liked the job. It was really fun. It was really fulfilling. It was very easy. It was
Mm.
very low stress for me. And they didn't need me. They didn't
Mm.
need me. After a year there, I had really fulfilled on all of the things in the job description. I had created some sustainable SOPs. I had trained people in each of the plants on how to do the basic maintenance stuff in case I couldn't get there for a storm or a blizzard, which meant they could do it any time if they needed to, and then they could expand their job role, get a bit of a raise. And when I looked at the landscape strategically, I was like, I could milk this role for a while, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not actually what's best for the company or all of the people involved. And
Mm.
so I went to my supervisor at the time and was like, I think you could get an intern to do this and give all of these people a piece of my salary and not have a role in this office anymore. I think that would actually be what's
Wow.
best. And it was a hard decision because it's like, okay, well, what am I going to do next? Right. But also, I was young and a little bit arrogant, right? Like, I'll find something.
I'll be great.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm grateful that I did. And I'm grateful that I did because this was just before the recession in 2008. So the timing if I'd waited a few more months, I could have actually really put myself in a pickle. But I miss the people there. It was kind of a good old boy vibe and good old gal vibe. And most of the people had been there since their career started. And, they knew each other intimately and they were very welcoming to me. And it was just a very wholesome, fun job. And the next couple of jobs I had after that were really stretched me. I went into the traveling consultancy and whatnot. But it was what was right, right? As a leader, sometimes the best thing and the kind thing to do is to leave or to let someone go or to end a project, right? Sometimes, making the call to stop the momentum is actually the best call. And I think
But it results in disconnection from relationships.
Yeah. And, potential trajectory or wealth for some people, right? Like there's a pivot that has to happen. In this case, it was mostly me and I was making a choice for myself. But there have been other times that felt very similar, where I made a call that the result was other people had disconnection. They thought they were on a path and then I made a decision that changed their path. And it was the kind thing to do. It was the right thing to do for everybody, But I remember that being one of my earlier lessons in that concept.
Yeah. It's so interesting because the previous interview I did for the podcast with Sebastian, he shared a very similar story about being an executive director and realizing that just in terms of allocating resources, the mission could continue further if he removed himself. It takes, I think, a lot of integrity to make that decision because, yeah, you're the one getting cut off. What is that like for you emotionally? To grapple with the here feels like the right thing to do strategically for the company and the people in the company, and it's going to impact me personally.
Yeah. I think this is where this version of myself now has things like the group where we know each other from, right? Which is in Weirdos, right? Finding people who are, that peer support and not having my professional work community be my primary community. And that was something I don't think I was really fully present to until I left corporate, because I went on this, there was several months where I was really shocked at how much my identity was collapsed with my corporate title. If you'd asked me when I worked at corporate, I'd be like, no, I have a very thriving life outside of this. And then once it was gone, it was like, wow, like really, when people ask what's up in my life, I'm like, I don't have work to talk about. What do I talk about? Even though I have all these other things going on, like without that making me get up in the morning, what does my morning routine look like? There was just so many little pieces of life that I came to realize were really tied up working for someone else. And I don't do that anymore. And so at the time when I made that decision, when I was working for the bottling plant, I was really young and it didn't even occur to me. It was just like, this is the right thing to do. And I'm going to trust that if I do the right thing, that the universe, God will have my back. And so it didn't even really dawn on me for very long anyway, to just stay and write it out. Like it wasn't a huge conversation. But, now 20 plus years later, it is literally more than 20 years later, the loneliness piece doesn't weigh in as much because I do the work to have community outside of my work peers, right? The last company I worked for was a very large company. And even there, I had learned the lesson that, yeah, I was friends with some of my immediate counterparts and peers, but I also worked hard to cultivate relationships with people in completely unrelated departments. because then we could have community around the brand we worked for, the values, the corporate structure, but our job roles had nothing to do with each other. And there was some freedom and some deeper community available in that. It wasn't friends of convenience, it was friends of choice. We just happened to all work for the same company. And I think that's something we lose pulse on, is when most of our friends become friends of convenience, and our commonality is something that could change very quickly. And, yeah, it can get very complicated.
That is so, yeah. Friends of choice versus friends of convenience is such a wise way to look at it. And I really hear in what you're talking about something that I value too, and that I think people usually neglect, whether in leadership or elsewhere: deliberate, thoughtful cultivation of friendships. And how do you feel that that impacted your experience of loneliness and isolation, or not,
Yeah.
over your career?
There were many times where, especially like the middle, like I said, the middle chunk of my career, I was traveling a lot. And what that looked like is I would embed myself in an organization for 3 to 9 months. So I would live in corporate housing in a new city where I knew nobody. Right. And that was the growth edge for me. Is the first couple of times I did that, I just kept trying to travel home as much as I could. But then I learned how to make friends, right? To make friends with the bartender, to make friends with the clerk at the grocery store, to become a regular at a diner and make friends, But initially I didn't have that skill or that awareness, and it could be really lonely, right? And when most of your friends are your quote work family, which personally I loathe that phrase. We're not family. We're all there for an objective. We do not have each other's best interests in mind, right? That's what my family does. But when most of your community is your work family, that's the crux of it, right? Is it's not only just friends of convenience, there's also the fact that everyone there is not out for each other. Everyone there ultimately has what's best for themselves in mind. And so a lot of my career, I spent 4 or 5 years at one company, then I spent several years jumping around. And every time I switched, it was like I had a whole new,
Bye bye,
whole new circle.
family.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm grateful for that's one of the many lessons I got out of those years when I was doing a lot of traveling, is the value of connection outside of the workplace. When you travel that much for another company, there's an expectation that you're just going to work all the time, because what else do you have to do? Right. So, you're putting in 60, 70-hour weeks because you don't know anybody and you're not at home. And what else are you going to do? And I pretty quickly put up some real clear boundaries. And I used that time to, explore and be a tourist and make friends and have new experiences, because otherwise my mental health would suffer. It would be really lonely. Yeah.
It sounds like you have a big strength in that. You are strong on understanding when to be a leader for your own life, when to set boundaries for yourself, and really being clear that nobody else is the authority over you, that you are the authority and the captain of your life, and you have to make deliberate choices to get what you need.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great example. It's a great example. I'm so glad we're having this interview. One of the things that's been on my mind as we talk, and I haven't brought it a ton into the podcast, but for those who don't know, I'm a big Enneagram aficionado, and I teach the Enneagram, which is a personality type system. There's 9 main personality types. I think you and I, Sunny, have talked about it before, right? And do you know your Enneagram type? It's like
I'm a
totally
7.
pinging for me. With an 8 wing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I hear those boundaries. I'm a type 8, and I'm just like, I hear those type 8 boundaries. Just, they're so good. Do you know your subtype?
Is that another number, or is that the way of
That's
being?
the social, self-preservation, or sexual.
Sexual.
Ah, okay. Maybe self-preservation secondary?
Maybe.
There's
It's
a
been a while since I looked at it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a way in which you have a really great focus on making sure that your needs are met. And I think of that as a self-preservation.
It is. There is the me that exists without any trauma or influence. And then there
Mm.
is the me that exists as a response to the trauma starting in childhood and who I needed
Mm.
to be safe. And the
Mm.
me that needed to adapt in order to be safe in childhood ended up also serving me in my corporate career. And
Mm.
so, one of the beautiful outcomes for me of being able to retire 10, 12 years ago now is that I got to really venture back into what is the me that exists without the
Mm.
heavy influence of those people, those things, those circumstances. You know, who am I going to be when I don't have anyone else to answer to, anyone else to dominate me, anyone else to tell me what I'm supposed to do?
Mm.
So I think my natural sort of natal way of being is Enneagram with
Mm-hmm.
sexual subtype, and then my adapted way of being is probably an 8 with self-preservation, and both have their time
Mm.
and place that they serve. So
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to be fully us, right? In a like that's always the challenge. Everybody's like, just be yourself. But with all of our family of origin overlay, all of the trauma, all of the systemic pressures, wherever you sit in a system, I think that's the ultimate triumph is to come back to being who you naturally are without people telling you who you should be. I love that. So, when you're at the top, when you're in leadership, no one really gets to see your balance sheet of burdens. Here, we like to open the private ledger. I feel like we've kind of already been getting some peeks in there. So, I would love to hear from you one cost that you experienced from being in leadership.
I think it can tie back to some of the conversations we've already had around expectations and isolation. There's, depending on the size of organization you're in, it's quite possible that there's only a limited number of people at the same leadership you are or above, which then limits the people who you can not commiserate, that's not the right word, but who really can share experiences with and you can be transparent with, especially when it comes to non-disclosure and appropriateness of sharing or
Mm-hmm.
brainstorming, getting feedback on a decision, validation, all of that fun stuff. I think for me, the cost was time and relationships outside of work. The higher
Mm.
into the echelons I went, the more expectation there was that I would be available. I remember my family goes on a vacation every year together, and I remember missing this amazing experience they had kayaking because I was inside reviewing some
Mm-hmm.
spreadsheets or whatever, some documentation that the team had not gotten done on time before I left, but it was still neat, and instead of being like, you know what, the company's not going to crumble, I'm going to hold my boundary, I did the thing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I missed moments, I missed time, I missed experiences, and I think I even missed some signs that my body was giving me that it needed some attention and health, wellness and things. So
Mm.
I think the cost is we underestimate how much energy it takes to fulfill those expectations and how little we have left for everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of my clients, we did an extra. She's been with me like 15 or 16 years now. I'm just like on as an advisor basically. But something we did years ago that of all the transformational work I've done, because just sidebar, like I do so much deep inner child healing, transformational, ancestral burden relieving stuff. We had a conversation one time about her priorities and just being really clear about setting her priorities on purpose. And she still says that's one of the most important things we ever did. I'm like, wow, but not everybody, in fact, most people probably don't understand that your priorities get set unconsciously and that you cannot have more than one top priority. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of sort of share two. That's it. Everything else will be much less. So I love that you highlight that and that it's important for people to recognize that when you're in those kinds of positions, you have chosen this as your top priority and everything else is going to fight for second, third, and fourth place. But it's not the Olympics where gold and silver are like right there on the platforms. It's like there's gold and then everything else is like down somewhere on the butt, like near the base of the mountain.
It really can be. I like to use the analogy of the big rocks, little rocks, sand and water, and what you put in the jar, there's only room. So you put in your big rocks first, and then, your little rocks can find their spots around. And I think that when you're a leader, especially a leader in a corporation or where you're working for someone else, that job becomes the equivalent of like 3 of your 5 big rocks. Like it takes up an enormous amount of space in the jar that is your life. And it's impossible to not have something else suffer and get less of you. And so I'm all about choice and agency. And so I like to really look at, okay, if I do this, what am I going to intentionally release so that it doesn't occur for me or others like suffering or abandonment or neglect. Rather, it's a shift in priorities that was created and, manifested and handled responsibly.
I can't remember where I heard this. Yeah, I'll have to go look it up. But I remember watching an interview with some famous man who was good at something, right? He was famous for being good at something. And they said, how did you get so good at whatever it was? And he said, other things suffered. And I thought that was, it just like, when I hear emotional truths, I'm like, oh, yes, that feels so right. That feels so true. Not in a way that we have to celebrate or say that's amazing, but just it's so important to allow the truth and the grief of that knowledge. We cannot honor everything equally. Other things will suffer.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's how it is, right? It is what it is.
Yeah.
In your ledger, what is one invisible asset that you had that maybe you didn't realize at the time?
Neurodiversity.
Ooh, tell me about that.
I was often commended and at a girl asking questions no one else was, whether it was questions everybody was thinking about but nobody wanted to ask, or just really getting into something other people hadn't thought about. I was asking questions no one else was. And in hindsight, it was autism. It was hyperfocus. It was attachment to a need to know the answer and an inability to release it, right? Like I was like they say, like you're like with a dog with a bone. Part of it was youth and naivete, but I think a lot of it was neurodiversity. I was an undiagnosed autistic ADHD person, and I didn't know any better. I was actually being socially awkward and probably a little arrogant and inappropriate. But again, because of my privilege, because of the way I looked, because of my age, because of how people chose to revere me, I got away with it. In fact, I was commended for it. But I think that was absolutely kind of a secret asset of mine that I didn't care. I was going to ask the questions. I was going to, what do you mean we don't want to talk about that? What do you mean somebody's going to get in trouble for making a bad decision? There's lots of people suffering for it. So of course we're going to rectify this really silly thing in the spreadsheet. What do you mean we're not supposed to talk about it? Right. So
I love that. When I think of people with neurodiversity, having that as like they wouldn't be where they are if not for that neurodiversity. I think of Greta Thunberg. She just doesn't care about the social awkwardness, and it's made her a really impactful figure in the climate change fight. So I love that. I absolutely honor that with you. And it's cool that you see it now. I bet that is validating to past versions of yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
What is, and I think you've talked about it, but maybe there's a different answer, or maybe you want to expand upon this. One investment that you are making now for your well-being.
Again, I could probably think about it really hard, come up with some really profound things. But the first thing that comes to mind is actually really simple. I do a quarterly solo sabbatical. So I usually, sometimes I can only do it for a day, but most of the time I go somewhere and I book, 2 or 3 nights in an Airbnb, and it's usually somewhere in nature because that's what serves me. And I take all of my metaphysical, spiritual books or wherever I'm studying, and I take lots of whatever feels nourishing for my body. Sometimes it's junk food, mostly it's healthy food, but it depends, right? And I just disappear.
We love our Cheetos.
right? Sometimes it's a junk food
Yeah,
type of deal,
sometimes it's
right?
the thing.
And I just disappear for 2 days by myself. And personally, I choose to have that be disconnected from tech other than checking in with my family. And I usually spend a lot of time in nature. And I just take 2 days to disconnect from everything and focus on myself. I remember one trip in particular was when my kid was really young, and I just binged watched stuff and ate junk food for 2 days. But you know what? That was the first time I'd had my
Yeah.
body to myself in 2 years, and gosh darn it, that's what I needed, and it was so
Yeah.
restorative, right? So yeah, once a quarter I do at least a day, but usually two full days as like a solo sabbatical from everything, and it has been very, very nourishing.
Love that. I can think of several of my clients who also do that in their roles. Is one of them's actually going to be on the podcast later, and she's got a lot of pressure, but boy, I also hear that she really schedules those, like, I am away and I'm away from everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it feels like in leadership, especially the more people you have in the wagon that you're partly pulling, it's the lack of release from that pressure ever. You know what I mean? It doesn't always feel heavy. Sometimes you're trucking it. You've got your stride, but sometimes it's just like I just want the release of that, even just for a moment, to be like, okay, my shoulders can relax, and
Well,
then I can
and
come back
yeah,
in.
and when I think about if I had done this back when I was at corporate, there's a lot of benefits. There's the release from the pressure. There's also the team having the regular time to shine, right? My team has to figure it out without me and know that they can be self-sustaining, right? And or miss me and realize that I'm
Mm-hmm.
there to have their back, right? My bosses, my supervisors have a chance to see that my team is I've raised good ones, right? I've got a good team
Uh-huh.
I'm cultivating, but also my value, right? So there's a lot of value to taking time away, I think, that we underestimate. So yeah, I think if I had done this regularly when I was back in corporate leadership, it would have given everybody a chance to shine and find their groove, and yeah, it would have been good for everybody. So
Nice.
yeah.
What do you wish more leaders felt permission to say out loud?
I need a nap.
Yeah, right?
And I mean, I'm being silly, but also seriously, like there's this culture amongst leaders often where everybody is sort of subconsciously or consciously one upping each other. And like, how productive can you be?
Mm-hmm.
How early did you get up today? How much did you do? How many
Mm-hmm.
plates are you keeping? And it's like, that's not actually serving anybody's whole well
Nah.
being, right? So normalizing, yeah, man, I could use a nap.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind if we reschedule our 2 o'clock and we can both just pass out on our collective couches or go to our cars for a bit? Can we just both catch up
Yes.
on sleep and then we'll be kinder to each other and be better productive employees later? So, yeah, I wish we could normalize expression of needing a break, needing some sleep, needing some
Mm.
space.
Yeah, it's like everybody always feels like they have to be on for each other. And
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes this communal pressure. I love that. I think that's a great idea. If you're listening to this, maybe you can lead that culture change at your company. Like,
Yeah.
just normalize being like, you know what? 15 minutes isn't going to kill any of us. Everybody just go and, take some kind of mental rest in any kind of way that would serve. I think that's a great
Absolutely.
idea. Well, we're coming to the end. I'm going to ask you the time machine question, but before I do, I know that even though you've been retired for a while, you do still provide services as an intuitive strategist and a fractional COO. If anybody is interested in working with you and your wisdom at this place, how would they do that?
Yeah. Yeah, as of this recording, which we're almost in August of
Mm-hmm.
2025, I do have an opening for another client. I just had somebody wrap up recently. I work with people both as a consultant and as a fractional leader, and folks can learn more about that at my website, which is wildflowerstrategy.com. And if you put in /COO, that takes you straight to that information. I also work with a nonprofit every quarter, pro bono, offering kind of
Mm.
strategic oversight. So if anybody has one or wants to nominate one, they can also track me down and tell me about them, because I pick a new one every quarter to play with for a season. So Yeah.
Lovely. If people want to track you down, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Social.wildflowerstrategy.com is the best way. It's got my email, all my socials, all the places you might prefer to cyber stalk me or DM me are going to be at social.wildflowerstrategy.com.
Awesome. Don't stalk her. That's not okay. We're just not going to have that happen at all. But enjoy and follow and want to communicate with Sunny. That's how you do it. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, so we're going to open the doors of the time machine. You get to step in, program the dial to go back to some point in your career. Where would you zap to, and what would you want to say to yourself earlier in your career?
I think for me, that first company I worked at where I was a temp and the IT department scooped me up, right? There was a moment where I had the thought I could have a career in this, and I diminished it, right? And literally for the next 15 years, I was faith in it till I made it. I was always like, someone's going to figure out that I'm just an art major that stumbled into this job. And I'm not really supposed to be here. I'm really meant to be a creative person. So yeah, I think if I had a time machine and could go back and talk to that version of myself, I would tell her like, hey, what would happen if you just owned the fact that this is your career and creative people can work in tech? Like, I think that might have freed me up in a way that I could really own and appreciate and enjoy my success instead of always having an underlying sense of imposter syndrome or fear, fear that it might end, fear that I wasn't enough, all that stuff. I think like that there was definitely a moment where if I could go back and talk to her right around that time and be like, girl, what if you actually do have this? I think it could be an interesting shift. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And in some way, let's just say that that's happened. And that moves forward into the present time too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. Your experience is so interesting and unique, and I think it's going to benefit other people who might be in leadership and don't look like the norm in whatever way. I think they're going to hear a lot in your story that they appreciate and feel validated by.
Good. I love that. Thank you for having me, giving me a chance to share my story and offer that validation.
Thanks everyone for listening to Lonely at the Top. If today's conversation resonated, I hope you'll give yourself permission to pause even just for a moment and check in with what you might be carrying silently. You don't have to hold it all alone. If you're ready for support in your leadership, you can learn more about working with me at rachelalexandria.com. If you know another leader who would benefit from hearing this podcast, please send it their way because, yeah, it's lonely at the top, but it doesn't have to stay that way.